Hello and welcome to another episode of BOU Connects. Here we break down the big world of economics, of finance and central banking into simple, relatable and easy to digest conversations. Today's topic is pertinent to this season. So if you're doing your extra grocery Christmas shopping, this topic is for you. My name is Pumla Nabachwa and I'm your host today. Have you ever wondered why some of the prices of the goods that you ordinarily buy, like bread, just start to rise? Or why you find yourself having to spend a little bit more transport money? Or why you have to leave a little bit more kameza money? Well, that's what we call inflation. And here to break down that topic for us is my dear colleague, the brilliant Dr. Nicholas Okot. He's a deputy director at the Bank of Uganda. And he has graced us with his presence today to simplify the big world of inflation, to debunk inflation for us. You're very welcome to the BOU Connects podcast, Nicholas.
Thank you, Pumla, and thank you, our viewers, for the opportunity to talk to you and discuss the issue of inflation. It's an issue that affects all of us. It affects my colleague, Pumla, it affects myself, and affects all of you outside there. And we want to make it simple for you to understand because it's something we do day in, day out, and keeps us running as a central bank. Over to you, Pumla.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. So let's just get started. But I would like us to, as you've said, keep it really simple. Let's start with, in your own words, what is inflation and how does it affect the average Ugandan? But I need you to explain this to me like you're speaking to a 12-year-old child who went and bought chapati for 500 shillings yesterday. And now when he went back the next day, it was 600 shillings. So please explain to us inflation.
Let me start it off from the easier angle, and that is inflation is the change in prices of a set of goods and services that we frequently consume. We created what we call a basket, and we put together all the goods that we as Ugandans frequently buy and use them for our own day-to-day lives. Those goods move in terms of prices. The prices move differently for each of the goods. So you might find the price of matoke going down while the price of sugar is going up. That brings us to the concept of aggregation. So we want to add together the price of sugar and the price of matoke's movement. Now, overall, every month we measure out the price of each of those goods are moved: matoke, bread, beef, sugar, salt, and everything, and then put them together as a weight of all the as a sum of all the price of all the goods and services. And then we see how that price has changed from the last time we measured it. If we do measure it on month, we call it monthly inflation change. But the one we usually talk about more often is the annual inflation change. So it's the change in the price of all the goods that Ugandans consume over the last year compared to the change compared to the price of those goods now. So we compare the prices, how they were, for instance, in November last year, 2023, and how they have moved and where they are now in the current period.
2024.
Yeah.
So it is from 2023 to 2024. So that's a 12 months period. Yes. Okay, so I have a friend called Emma. She works in Umeme. And when she joined Umeme, I was so happy because I was like, finally there's someone who works in Umeme who can show us that person who wakes up in the morning to switch off and switch on for us power, who decides. And strangely enough, on social media we got a question where somebody asked me that same thing. But Pumla, who sits in Bank of Uganda and switches on and off the switch that makes prices go up and then go down? So I decided, let me ask this question in this way. What causes inflation? Is it that someone switches on a switch and boom, everything becomes expensive? Or is there a process that leads to the increase of prices of goods and services?
Okay, Pumla, thank you very much for that. It's not a switch on, it's not a switch off. It's a series of events that leads to price of goods and services adjusting from one level to another. The first set of reason why the prices would adjust would be demand. If too many people are demanding the same good, then they're all rushing to buy the same good. In that context, the price of that good would go up. And like I said in the beginning, these are aggregate prices. The price of other goods may not go up, but the movement on the price of one item so high can actually drive the price of other items that has actually stayed the same. The other aspect that could also drive the prices of goods is also prices are coming from elsewhere. And that is what we call the cost of production. Workers may demand more wages, and that wages feeds into the price at which that goods are being produced, especially for goods produced in the factories. It might be different from the goods produced in the garden. So for the goods produced in the factories, a change in the price of labor or the amount we pay our workers would feed into the price of the good that the factory set at the gate price, and the price continues to move. Of course, related to that is the cost of transporting the good from where it is produced to where it is being consumed. So in some contexts, that could also drive the price of that good. Then Uganda is a country that is open. It can get good from other countries and also can sell good to other countries. So we sell coffee to other people, but we buy other goods like cars and so forth. Now, to bring those goods, we need money, and we need money of other people. For instance, the most common money we need is the US dollar. And so if the price of the dollar against Uganda shillings moves, then the price of goods that come from outside will definitely go up. Of course, there are cars, there are clothing, garments that we buy from outside. There are many other things, including building materials like tiles and so forth. All their prices would move up. And because the people who produce those goods could also be interested, they could also move up price of other things. Of course, one special good that moves the price of many other goods is oil. Yeah, we have oil, but we don't produce oil.
Yet. We don't produce oil yet.
Because the price of oil around the world moves, our prices of goods might move because oil is useful for us to transport our goods from where they are produced to where we consume them, or to transport the services from where the services are produced to where the services are being consumed. So those are the factors. We can be described in two simple words: the demand factors and then the supply issues that move them.
So for oil, I like what you say about oil, and I think people need to understand how oil actually affects us, because I think people don't realize that when oil, just that we like to say oil prices have risen, but I don't know if people make the connection between the fact that that oil, as long as the price of oil increases, then our pump prices, when you go to Shell, when you go to Total, when you go to Starbucks, that's impacting on literally your domestic pump prices. And, if you can't transport things from one place to another, it's problematic. Okay, so now that you've talked about demand and supply factors, can we bring in Bank of Uganda? Okay. Bank of Uganda, because this seems like a lot. And I know that there's many people out there who, when they start to think about things like, so who's doing all this work? People are thinking about numbers, data, people wearing suits with ties, making all these big decisions. So how does the Bank of Uganda control or manage inflation in Uganda?
Thank you for that question, Pumla. The main work of the Bank of Uganda is to see that prices of goods and services that I described on move slowly and stay at a similar price for a long period of time. So that we call it stable. They stay stable for a long period of time, and they are also fairly low. For our case, we put ourselves to have them as low as around 5% or below. Yeah. Now, how does the Bank of Uganda comes in? First, the bank is responsible for printing and issuing our currency, the Uganda shillings. Now, prices of goods and services consumed in Uganda are quoted in Uganda shillings, what you call the unit of account. Now, the Bank of Uganda can control the supply of money through a series of events, or can control the amount of shillings that we have among us as Ugandans using small areas of small way of doing things. Now, the first one, which we used to use in the past, was to regulate the amount of money that's available to the banks, so that when you go to the banks to borrow, you don't find the money available, or the banks can charge you a much higher amount of interest to get it from the bank. That system was good and worked for us for a very long period of time. But as the world evolves, as things change, technology came on board, money started going on mobile money started going on internet, things started moving much faster. We came in with something called digital money. Now that innovation made it very difficult for us to track how much money supply is there at a point in time. And therefore, some small relationship in economics got destroyed. Luckily, economists are also very innovative. We came up with something new. So we came up with something they are calling inflation targeting, which is simply means you set where you want your inflation to be, and then you work toward that target every day and see that every now and then you are achieving that target in the longer term. Now, in that arrangement, and that's what we do now, we set an interest rate, a policy rate, we call it the central bank rate, or sometimes people call it the CBR, and that rate is supposed to help to set the base rate at which commercial banks lend between themselves and within their wholesale customers. And then every day we meet to continue to fine tune that the rate stay within the range, because we think that if the rate stays within the range of the policy rate, the amount of money in circulation would come down. Because as you know, for one to buy a good at a higher price, that person needs to have money. So for us to regulate the amount of money, we set the cost of money to be higher. So the central bank rate is a tool that sets the cost of money to be higher. And in that context, when we switch it to be high, that means you're supposed to consume less. You're supposed to reduce on your consumption. Probably if you have more money, you could invest the money and get a higher return. Otherwise, you can consume less, or you may not need to borrow to consume. So if you had planned to borrow to buy a new car or to buy a house, you should stop that and wait until when prices have come down. Or if you have also planned to borrow, for instance, for a party, maybe you can also postpone the party if it is possible to postpone the party. That's how it moves. So that's how the bank comes in. The bank comes in to control the amount, regulate the amount of money among each one of us, or the amount of shillings in the economy.
But that's now on the direction of if we need to reduce inflation. But even the reverse is true. There are times when we are, no, when we are increasing is when we're trying to curb inflation, isn't it?
Yes.
But then there are also times when we reduce the central bank rate as well. And there are times when we maintain the central bank rate. And I like the fact that I think what's interesting about this economics is like there is no one size fits all. For example, you could say that we are going to raise the central bank rate because we project that inflation may be rising in the future, but then we've also got to be considerate about economic growth and balancing both inflation projections and where we want, because we have to be cognizant of the money in people's pockets. And if we want economic activity to grow, then we can't always be deciding to raise the central bank rate. So I think maybe it's important for us, for people to also understand that dynamic between how we balance making the decision of inflation and vis-a-vis economic growth.
It's an interesting but a very tricky balance, and that's what we do every day. In the first podcast, you talked to my colleague, Millie, and she described to you how much data we need and how much information we need. Yeah, to do what we do, we need a lot of information. Now, first, we need to know how much the economy is likely to grow. But also we need to project and know where the inflation is based on the information that we have available. Now, there is something which we call a trade-off. I don't know whether that's the simplest word I can use to describe the relationship between inflation and economic activities. So when inflation goes up, that means economic activities has picked up at some level. But to control inflation, like I said earlier on, you need to increase the cost of money, which is the interest rate, the policy rate we use. Now, when you increase the cost of money, you make it difficult to also to consume goods, which I talked about earlier on, as well as difficult to invest, because investors need money to invest and grow the economy. So as you try to contain inflation by increasing the central bank rate, you actually also causing a disadvantage a bit to the economy by making growth a little bit slower because you have capped down investment, you've capped down consumption as well. Yeah, so we try to do the balance. Now, to do the balance, over time, people have developed kind of like a formula or kind of like a rule that helps us to understand that if you've tightened for this period of time, you look at other variables that are moving. For instance, if you have tightened, if you have increased the central bank rate, which is tightening, and then you see that people are not borrowing, and then your outlook is showing that inflation is actually not going to be higher in the future, then you now begin to think about growth because we need to grow. You cannot be on the tightening side forever. At some point, you need to come back and also grow the economy. At that level, we now start beginning to reduce the central bank rate gradually, depending on how we think inflation is going to move going forward. Yes.
So we, in the decisions we make, I take it from you that Bank of Uganda has the interests of Omuntu Wawansi at heart in whatever decisions that they make, yes? Yes. Yes, okay. So maybe let's move on to something we all agree on, even us, the policy makers, that inflation can be quite overwhelming. Seeing prices rise can be quite overwhelming, and yet sometimes it is inevitable. So how can we guide Ugandans on how to manage or maybe cushion the effects of inflation, especially during this Christmas season? We have some tactics on managing their especially the effects on their finances, how they can manage in this season.
Yeah, inflation usually comes around, especially around this period of the year or the period that follows this part of the year in January, February. Largely because we demand so much for Christmas. We like to consume, we like to travel to our villages, we like to meet our people, to buy gifts, new clothing, and so forth. Now that drives the demand for all those goods. And because the demand of those goods have driven up and their supply has not changed, the prices are going to go up. That means we need to do something to manage them because life doesn't stop in Christmas. Christmas is just one of those events. Life doesn't stop with Christmas. Yeah. Okay. Christmas is the remembrance of the birth of Jesus Christ. Jesus was born. We will always remember it year in, year out. And that you can actually celebrate Christmas on another day in case you actually feel you are not well ready to celebrate on Christmas Day. So one thing we should do to contain inflation around the period of Christmas is to try to see how much we want to spend. That means planning. We should plan our own expenditure. So you will look at the amount of money you have in the basket of the money you have as a family and sit down and plan. How much are we going to buy clothes for the children? How much are we buying food on that day of Christmas? How much are we going to leave behind for the time that's coming after the Christmas period? So that you have some amount of money sitting aside in case there's some problem or in case the price of goods begin to rise, you have a bit of money that you can turn back to. That's one way how you can actually manage the inflation, planning. The second one is investing. In the past, people would form small groups and then those groups would work toward raising money for Christmas. That was a good strategy. We could also adapt that. We can begin to plan for our Christmas as early as January, February. You start putting a small amount of money in your account, in your savings in the bank, in your mobile money account where they can keep storing it and keeping track of it, such that by the time of Christmas, you are not picking from your regular income, you are picking from the income you've saved over a long period of time. And that's the money that will be helping you to pull you through Christmas. Remember, in our case of Uganda, there's always school fees after Christmas. So in the planning process, if you think you're weak, you should pay your school fees upfront. There is no need to hold on to that money to earn the little interest. If you think you're going to be weak, end up drinking the money, end up traveling with the money, eating good food, in a nice restaurant at the beach or everywhere.
So then when it's time to pay school fees, you start begging, for family
you start
to
begging,
help you.
or worse still, you fail to pay. And that has an impact on the children. When the children's school fees are not paid, they're being sent out of the classroom and their friends are remaining, that's not something very good. So you have to have that. For our people in the countryside, in the villages, it's good to store some food. In the past, we used to have granaries. So for people who have cereals and can store them in granaries or in stores in the house, please preserve some of the food. Because food is produced in Uganda in 2 seasons. So one of them is this one here. And in most cases, this one gets consumed a lot. So if you have a chance to store some of what you have vested, please keep it aside. But our people who produce matoke and sweet bananas are lucky. As long as the rain is there, you can always go to the garden and pick something, yeah, and have it. Yeah.
I like that you've given tips for people in all the class levels. You've given tips for people in the villages and also tips for people in the cities, in urban centers. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse. We can't reach January and then people are crying and saying 90 days of January. Yeah. Anyway, you know what? I think we spoke about this earlier. Bank of Uganda, we put up a post on social media asking our audiences what about inflation and the role of Bank of Uganda that they wanted us to debunk. And we got so many responses. We would like to thank you so much for your responses, for your comments. There was a lot of activity in the comment section, but I know we don't have time to tackle everything. So I decided, because many of them were actually similar, I realized Ugandans have the same questions, you know? So that means that there is a gap. And I decided to pick out 2 questions that I'll have Nicholas answer for us. The first one was surrounding the exchange rate. This was by Marisa Bryan, and he said, I have a question about the exchange rate. Can't Bank of Uganda do something about it? It's painful when we transfer money to our neighbors and we have to send a lot of Uganda shillings. So Nicholas, in your expertise, can Bank of Uganda, or is Bank of Uganda doing anything about the exchange rate? And maybe you can start by explaining what the exchange rate is.
I think let me just start by explaining what the exchange rate is. So as you know, money is as jurisdiction or area where the money can work. So our money works in our country, Uganda. So you have the Uganda shillings for Uganda. And if you look at our neighbors, you have Kenya shillings for Kenya, you have Tanzanian shillings for Tanzania, and then the Rwandese franc for Rwanda. And the other countries also have their own currencies. Now, there's a price of currencies. Because the price at which you buy the Kenyan shilling using Uganda shilling depends on how the Kenyan shillings is actually strong. So the exchange rate itself is the price of one currency in terms of another. So the 3,670 that you pay today for the US dollar is the amount of money you need to spend to get $1. The easier way to think about it is if there was a good that is being sold in the US, let's say just a piece of chicken. That piece of chicken, if it costs $1 in the US, that piece should also cost 3,670 here in Uganda. So that reflects the price. Now, there are reasons why countries choose to have exchange rate the way they do have, or there are reasons that push them to choose them to have them the way they are now. One of them is how strong you're been exporting. Because for you to have the other people's money, you have to sell goods to them and get their money and bring it home. So for us to have a strong Uganda shillings, we need to sell a lot of goods outside so that we have more dollars, more Kenyan shillings, more euros coming inside, so that when we are buying things from them, we use that same money. That keeps our money also strong at the same time. But that's a good thing. It's a beauty. You have a strong money and you're lovely. You have lovely things with it. But there's also a small disadvantage of having a very strong money. And that's why, for instance, you can see that the Japanese, despite the fact that they're very strong, their yen is almost as strong as the Kenyan shillings. Reason being, having a very strong currency may not promote your exports.
Yeah, so because they become expensive for other countries, for the ones buying.
Because the cost of producing your good relative to that becomes very expensive. Imagine if it cost 5,000 to produce that piece of chicken I described earlier on. Then in that case, that means then the exchange rate between the dollar and the shilling has to move to 5,000 because of the cost of production is too high. So the amount must be consistent with the amount of goods and services that you have bought and you are trading with the other countries. Now, we do have a fairly weak currency in terms of the exchange rate between our neighbors. Reason being, over a period of time, because of the balancing act, we want to also have a very strong export, but we also want to have a very competitive economy. We have ended up with that level of exchange rate. That is the equilibrium at which the exchange rate is moving nicely, or the level at which it is moving well because of the amount of goods that we produce and export. but also the amount of goods that we import into our countries. Yeah. So if we demand too much import, the price that would also definitely go higher and higher than what we have at the moment. Yeah. So easy way to get it down is to export more and then have more.
And as you said
foreign
also
instead.
earlier, we, much as we're an open economy, we're also what they call liberalized. With
Yes.
the exchange rate is determined by factors of
Demand,
demand and
supply,
supply.
yeah,
So Bank of Uganda does not
Yes.
control.
Yeah, we don't directly control the exchange control, but some of our actions do have impact on the exchange rate. For instance, if we increase the central bank rate while we are trying to deal with inflation, the cost or the price of the bonds and the bills that we sell in our market goes up, and that attracts other people to come and buy. So now we are selling financial service. So when those people come to buy, they bring us more money. In the end, the shillings gain a little bit of strength, and then the price of shillings per dollar becomes much lower. So you spend less shilling to buy 1 unit of dollar. That can actually happen and help us as well. But of course, as well, if we do our own exports, like we've been doing recently with coffee, and we get a lot of money, then the shillings can remain strong. And then thirdly, we have our people who work outside. They work outside, but they love Uganda. So every time they send us things to buy home, for auntie, for mama, for everything. Now that brings in a lot more money for us, and that also supports us and help us to actually to grow. Then lastly, we're a good country, fairly stable country, so we have attracted other people to come with their money to invest and do business. That group also bring a lot of good money, and actually really good money come from that group. Yeah, so they bring us money, they put in their investment, so they cover their cost of import. So if they wanted to bring a capital equipment, they bring the capital equipment come with their money, so we don't need money to bring them on board. Yeah, so that means they've covered themselves, so they are called foreign direct investors because they have a lasting interest in our country. They are going to stay with us for a long time. They've set up their factories and they've set up their businesses, let's say an hotel, and we're doing business with them, and we are happy together because they
Now
feel
that we are
Uganda is a
going
good
into
country.
the oil era,
Yes.
yeah, things are going to get even
Yes.
more interesting.
Yes.
Let's have one final one with you, Nicholas. And this was, many people asked this question also. What viable policies can be utilized to curb both unemployment and inflation simultaneously? The bigger question here was why shouldn't Bank of Uganda have a dual mandate of promoting employment and also stabilizing prices? These were from the Pivot and Mr. B. Wolf. And a few other people kind of hinted on why aren't you doing both, taking care of unemployment as well as stabilizing prices?
Okay. That's a good question.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting.
And that is actually a common thing in the other countries around the world, that they actually take care of inflation to see, and then also take care of employment to see that there are people employed, but also the people have low prices in the country. We are doing something close to that. Our main work or our main mandate is to control inflation. So we say price stability. So we try to control inflation. But our secondary mandate or our second area where we look around is to ensure that the economy grows in a sustained way. Now that means after controlling inflation, because you first take care of the first priority, then we start looking aside. And in most of our statement, we have always quoted that now that inflation is going down, we want to reduce the price of borrowing so that people can borrow and have impact on economic activity. Now, because we don't have a clear way of measuring employment, we always want to talk about it in terms of economic growth. The assumption is that if they sustain economic growth cannot grow without the economy cannot grow without the people. So we need the people to work to grow the economy. So whether they're working in their gardens, they're working in the factories, they're working in the service sectors, they are all working toward growing the economy. So when the economy is growing in a sustained way, that means the people are employed. So they're
I
employed
think
in
you've had
schools as
it,
our
everybody,
teachers. They're
and I
employed. They're
love that
employed
you have been
in the
able
dockers
to not
downtown
only
here
tackle the
to actually sell
questions
for us
that
the
were
goods that
being
we need.
asked,
They're
but
employed
also
in the
to give us
markets. They're
such
employed in the garden. They're employed in
insightful
our factories wherever they
conversation
are set up
about
all around the
inflation and
country.
debunking inflation for us in such a relatable way. So as we wrap up, I just want to ask, do you have something that you'd like to share with Ugandans about inflation or about the Christmas season, anything, any final thoughts or views to share with our Ugandans?
Yeah, I do have. Thank you, everybody. I first want to begin by wishing you a Merry Christmas. And of course, when the new year finally come, I want you to make a strong resolution and enjoy the new year. But as you head towards Christmas, please be cognizant of inflation. Prices are going to rise because the supply of the goods or the services are not sufficient. I know the first one that usually picks up is the price of transport. Maybe in a week or two from now, the price of transport begins to rise up as we head towards Christmas. But please consume what you can, given your budget. Try to live within your means and save some for a rainy day. Some of the goods that you consume may go up in price sometimes in January. So if you consume all the money that you've saved all over throughout the year now, you'll not have enough to actually spend next time. I encourage you to make financial plan for this Christmas. It's not too late, but also above all, make plan for next year. We are here as the central bank to support you to ensure that inflation stays within the limit using the tools that are available to us. We always make the policy that supports everybody, not for a particular group of people. We make the policy for everybody. So we encourage you to enjoy yourselves, but be cognizant of how you enjoy yourself and protect your future saving by also keeping part of it so that you can use it when the time comes to pay school fees and to do your other work that time comes. I wish you a Merry Christmas once again.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Ugandans need to hear this each and every year. So thank you so much for the reminder. And to your viewers, we're not saying don't enjoy. Enjoy. But enjoy knowing that another year is starting, is coming, and you need money for that year, to start that year. So, if you have found this episode helpful, please remember to like, to share, to comment, and to subscribe to our Bank of Uganda YouTube channel and to follow us on our social media platforms. And if you have any queries or questions, or if there is a topic that you'd like us to discuss on our next episode, drop it in the comments. We would really love to hear from you. So until next time that BOU connects, have a Merry, Merry Christmas and a lovely, Happy New Year.